Summer 1943. The world had already been burning for 4 years, and yet the flames found new ways to twist themselves into shapes no man could predict. On the eastern steppes, Panthers, the Germans' great cats of steel, had stalked Soviet fields, their long-barreled guns tearing apart Red Army armor like paper. In Berlin, generals wrote reports dripping with pride. Here, at last, was a weapon that would guarantee their supremacy. Sleek, armored, and lethal, the Panther was spoken of as if it were not a machine, but a living predator unleashed upon the world. Across the Atlantic, the Americans answered not with predators, but with plodding farm mules, the Sherman tank. It was not the prettiest creature on the battlefield. Its armor was thin, its gun modest, its silhouette laughably tall. The British soldiers who fought alongside it gave it cruel nicknames. Tommy Cooker, for the way it seemed to burst into flame when struck. Yet it was built in staggering numbers, tens of thousands rolling off Detroit's production lines like loaves of bread out of an oven. Quantity, the Americans argued, had a quality all its own. Captain James Harrington did not think of his Sherman as a mule or a cooker. To him, it was a tool, no different in essence from the plow his father had trusted on the Kansas plains. Harrington had been 28 that summer, his boyhood hands once raw from fencing wire and wheat stalks. War had hardened him differently. His eyes carried a quiet weight, the calm of a man who understood both how fragile and how stubborn life could be. Where others saw thin armor, he saw mobility. Where others mocked a gun's small bite, he imagined the advantage of speed, surprise, and teamwork. To Harrington, the war was not about boasting steel, but about men. Men who trusted one another enough to face the impossible. His gunner, Sergeant Leo Martelli, could not have been more different. 31 years old, born to Italian immigrants in Brooklyn, Martelli had a mouth that moved faster than his trigger finger. Where Harrington's silence steadied the crew, Martelli's what kept them sane. He joked about everything, the rations, the mud, the Sherman's tendency to rattle like a tin toy. But behind the wisecracks was an edge of defiance, the kind that came from never having been handed anything in life. Martelli fought because he hated bullies, and the Nazis were the biggest bullies he had ever seen. In a German officer's mess outside Paris, Oberst Wilhelm von Kleist nursed a glass of cognac and studied his maps. He was 42, a soldier molded in the old Prussian tradition. Sharp posture, sharp uniform, sharp belief in the destiny of his Reich. His family's estate had been reduced to rubble in the Great War, and he had sworn to restore that lost honor. The Panther, to him, was no mere machine. It was the embodiment of Germany's return to greatness, a weapon that could erase shame from memory. When word came of the Americans pushing inland from Normandy, von Kleist sneered. He pictured their Shermans, laughable boxes with underpowered guns, and felt only contempt. The contest, in his mind, was already decided. History, however, thrives on mockery of certainty. By that summer, Allied intelligence already whispered that Mortain, a modest town tucked into the Norman hills, might become a hinge upon which the German counteroffensive would swing. The roads are twisted between hedgerows so dense they formed walls of living green. Farmers tilled fields where centuries of plows had furrowed the soil, while their barns leaned as though tired of watching armies come and go. Into this countryside, the war crept with a deceptive quiet. French children still played in courtyards, yet every shadow seemed to promise a storm. For Harrington and Martelli, Mortain would be more than a point on a map. It would be the ground where their fragile machines were asked to do the unthinkable, stand against the Panthers. Orders filtered down with clinical detachment. Block the German thrust, hold the town, no matter the cost. To most, it sounded like suicide. 7 Shermans against dozens of Panthers was arithmetic no sane man would attempt. And yet, within Harrington's chest, a stubborn voice muttered that even arithmetic could be fooled by courage and cunning. On the evening before they rolled into position, Harrington stood by the Sherman's hull, wiping dust from its olive paint. Martelli leaned against the turret, chewing gum with the casual insolence of a man who knew tomorrow might be his last. "Cap," Martelli said, spitting the gum into the dirt, "you ever wonder why they sent us to do these jobs? We're like the farm boys at the county fair, tossing rocks at the prize bull. Except this bull's got armor 3 inches thick, and a gun that'll gut us from a mile away." Harrington smiled faintly, not lifting his eyes from the tank. Bulls have blind spots. You just have to know where to stand. That was Harrington's gift. Where others saw doom, he saw possibility. Slim, narrow, fragile, but real. His men trusted that steadiness, even as they laughed at Martelli's grim jokes. Far across the hedgerows, von Kleist issued his own orders with icy precision. His Panther crews cleaned their guns, checked their radios, tightened their bolts. He promised them that tomorrow would be a demonstration of superiority, a reminder that German engineering outclassed American improvisation. The young lieutenants nodded eagerly, their confidence shining like their polished boots. None of them imagined that within days, the hedgerows would become graveyards for their great machines. The world seemed to pause in those last hours of calm. Crickets sang in the Norman dusk. Mothers gathered bread from ovens, and American soldiers leaned against their Shermans, smoking cigarettes beneath a sky brushed with fading light. Yet every breath was heavy with what loomed ahead. The contest was not simply steel against steel, but belief against belief. German certainty in invincible machinery versus American stubbornness in ordinary men. It is a cruel truth of war that the machines often inherit the reputations, but the men carry the burden. Harrington knew this as he looked at his crew. Martelli with his restless humor, Corporal Ellis the quiet driver, Private Thompson barely 20 and still clutching the photo of his sweetheart. They were not gladiators, nor heroes carved in marble. They were men caught in history's undertow, trying to swim where others had drowned. The Panthers would come at dawn, sleek shadows sliding through fog, confident as predators stalking easy prey. The Shermans would wait in hedgerow hollows, their engines coughing like tired mules, their guns small but steady, 7 against dozens. The numbers mocked them, but numbers alone could not account for the unpredictable stubbornness of the human spirit. As the last light faded over Mortain, Harrington whispered a quiet prayer, though not for victory. He prayed only that his men might stand without breaking, that their courage would not betray them when the fields turned to fire. Martelli broke the silence with a grin. "Cap, if we're all cooked tomorrow, I want you to know, your mule here makes a hell of a kitchen. Just make sure I'm not on the menu." Harrington chuckled softly, a sound more weary than amused. In that moment, among the hedgerows and fading dusk, the seeds of an impossible clash had already been sown. The world would soon discover that even mules, when cornered, can kick with surprising force. Dawn broke over Mortain with a sullen sky, the kind that promised neither blessing nor mercy. The hedgerows stood like dark walls, heavy with dew, their tangled roots gripping the Norman earth as if they too meant to resist whatever came storming down the roads. Smoke from farm chimneys curled into morning air, carrying the faint smell of bread and damp wood. But beneath that simple fragrance lurked the acrid taste of oil and steel. The town waited in uneasy silence, unaware it was about to become the crucible of a clash no one could have imagined. Captain Harrington sat inside his Sherman, the engine humming beneath him like the heartbeat of a nervous animal. He studied the dim horizon to the periscope, eyes narrowing against the fog. To his right, Sergeant Martelli leaned in the turret hatch, helmet tilted back, cigarette dangling from his lips. His grin was careless, but Harrington knew it was armor, words and humor shielding a man from the unbearable weight of what was to come. 7 mules against a jungle full of cats, Martelli muttered, exhaling smoke into the mist. "Cap, I've seen bets in Brooklyn worse than this, but at least those came with whiskey." Harrington gave no answer. He was listening to the earth. Somewhere beyond the mist, he swore he could feel a vibration building, like a storm yet unborn but certain. His men trusted that silence. When Harrington was quiet, it was not fear, it was thought, and thought was the only shield they had left. The vibration grew into a rumble. Then the rumble split into many throats, a chorus of grinding tracks and growling engines. The Panthers were coming. Heavy silhouettes appeared in the fog, their broad hulls hulking like predators creeping out of the jungle. Their guns jutted forward, long and confident, as though pointing the way toward inevitable victory. Private Thompson, barely 20, swallowed hard at the sight. His hands tightened on the photo of his sweetheart, tucked in the pocket of his uniform. Corporal Ellis, steady at the driver's controls, whispered something under his breath, a farmer's prayer disguised as routine. Each man braced, not for heroics, but for survival. The first panther fired. The shell screamed past Harrington's Sherman and slammed into the earth behind, showering the hedgerows with soil. Martelli barked a laugh. "Miss, you square-headed bastard. Guess Jerry didn't finish target practice." His hands flew over the gun, loading and aligning, his voice masking the tremor of adrenaline that pulsed through him. Harrington's command came calm and sharp. "Hold fire. Wait until they're closer. Flank shots only. Make it count." The Panthers advanced, their armor glinting dully even in the pale light. They moved as if certain nothing could stop them, but the hedgerows betrayed them. The thick walls of living green forced them into narrow lanes, slowed their turrets, made their bulk clumsy in the close quarters of Normandy's farm country. Harrington's eyes lit with recognition. This was the blind spot he had spoken of. "Ellis, move us forward, right flank." Harrington ordered. The Sherman lurched into motion, slipping from behind the hedgerow, like a wolf darting from cover. Martelli fired. The gun roared, the recoil rattling every bone in their bodies. The shell struck a panther's side armor with a scream of tearing metal. Sparks flared, then fire burst from its hull. The mighty predator staggered and died, its crew scrambling desperately as smoke devoured the machine. The Shermans answered the arithmetic of despair with courage. From 7 barrels spat defiance. Each shot was a prayer, each hit a miracle. Yet miracles bled a price. The second Sherman in Harrington's line caught a panther shell to the chest. The blast turned steel into flame, flame into coffin. Screams echoed for a heartbeat, then silence. Thompson flinched, tears in his eyes, but Harrington's voice steadied him. "Stay on target. Don't look back. Eyes on the cats." Von Kleist watched from his command panther, fury tightening his jaw. These Shermans were supposed to flee, to crumple before German might. Yet here they were, darting like gnats, striking from smoke and hedgerows, clawing at the flanks of his vaunted machines. He barked orders, his voice sharp as a blade. Tighten formation, press forward, crushed them beneath weight. But weight had become weakness. The Panthers bunched too close, their guns overlapping, their movement strangled. From another hedgerow, Harrington's Sherman emerged, firing point-blank into the exposed side of another beast. It collapsed in fire. Smoke rolled upward, black and thick, staining the morning sky. "Cap!" Martelli shouted, grinning even as sweat poured from his face. "We're writing a new cookbook, How to Roast Panther in 7 Easy Shots." Harrington almost smiled, but the next explosion cut it short. A Sherman behind them took a direct hit. The blast threw its turret skyward, a grotesque spectacle against the dawn. The crew inside never even had time to scream. Thompson's voice cracked over the radio, high with panic. "They're everywhere. We can't hold them." "Yes, we can," Harrington snapped, his voice like iron. "They bleed like we do. Remember that. Stay with me." Courage in his tone steadied the men, as if the words themselves were armor. They pressed on. Another panther burst into flames. Then another. The hedgerows became both weapon and shield, allies more loyal than any steel. The Germans fired blindly into green walls, their long barrels slow to adjust. The Shermans darted, reappeared, vanished, struck again. The numbers still mocked them, but the balance began to tilt. Von Kleist's fury burned hotter than the wrecks around him. "Impossible," he muttered, watching another panther crippled by what should have been a child's toy of a tank. His pride cracked, though he buried it beneath command. He would not admit weakness. Not here. Yet deep in his chest, a doubt sprouted like a poisonous seed. By mid-morning, the fields of Mortain were littered with carcasses of steel. Burned-out hulls smoked like funeral pyres, their black plumes rising into the gray sky. The ground trembled with each blast, each clash of fire and will. Inside the Sherman, Martelli reloaded again, hands blistered, face streaked with grime. "Cap," he said, voice hoarse but still carrying that ragged humor. "I think we're making history. Trouble is, I don't know if we'll live long enough to brag about it." Harrington didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where more panthers crawled through the fog. He knew the arithmetic still wasn't on their side. But in the chaos of Mortain, arithmetic was no longer truth. The field had become something else entirely. An arena where steel met flesh, where the plow mules of Kansas met the predators of Berlin, and neither side yet knew who would break first. As another panther belched smoke and fire, the battle paused just long enough for Harrington to draw a breath. His men were still alive, still fighting, still holding the line. The impossible had not yet killed them, but the storm was far from over. And somewhere inside the fog, a roar was still building. Smoke clung low over the hedgerows, curling through the gaps like a living thing. The battlefield no longer looked like France, but like some charred wasteland carved from nightmare. Panthers prowled in the haze, their hulks dark shapes moving with heavy menace. Yet what should have been the march of predators began to feel like the blundering of beasts lost in a trap. The ground, the fog, and the cunning of men inside thin-skinned Shermans had started to turn Mortain into a hunter's snare. Captain Harrington kept his eyes on the periscope, his jaw tight, his voice level. Every order he gave was clipped, steady, as if the battlefield were nothing more than another day's work. But inside, his blood hammered with the knowledge that they had no right to still be standing. 7 Shermans against dozens of Panthers. It should have been a massacre, over within minutes. Instead, the Panthers were burning, their hulks black scars against the earth. Survival had shifted into something more, an edge of belief that they might actually win. Sergeant Martelli felt it too, though he cloaked it in jest. Sweat streaked through the grime on his face as he shoved another shell into the gun's breech. "Cap, I don't know about you," he muttered, "but I'm starting to think Jerry cats aren't so scary once you teach them to dance." His laugh was rough, cracked with exhaustion, but it lifted the crew's spirits in ways no sermon could. Even Private Thompson managed a grin. Though his hand still trembled around the photo he carried in his pocket. The truth was plain. Panthers had the armor, the guns, the reputation. But Shermans had the ground. The hedgerows that once seemed a curse were now allies. Panthers needed open fields to kill at range. In Morton's cramped lanes, their turrets swung too slow, their bulk too clumsy. Harrington exploited every hedge, every rise in the earth. He maneuvered his crew like chessmen, always darting, always vanishing, always striking from a blind spot. Another Sherman, driven by Corporal Ellis, lunged from behind a stone wall. Its gun barked, slamming a shell into a panther's exposed flank. The German giant shuddered, fire coughing from its seams before collapsing in flames. Ellis whooped in triumph, though it died quickly as a return shell ripped through a neighboring Sherman, tearing apart in a bloom of fire. Loss and victory arrived in the same breath. Impossible to separate. Von Kleist, from his command tank, watched the carnage with disbelief hardening into rage. His men were supposed to roll over the Americans like iron-crushing twigs. Instead, the hedgerows turned their formation into a column of targets. His voice snapped over the radio, barking orders to push harder, faster, to crush these gnats with weight alone. Yet the more he pressed, the more tangled his panthers became, jammed in lanes too narrow, their strength devouring itself. For the German crews, the Shermans became phantoms. From fog and smoke, they appeared, loose fire, and vanished again. A panther gunner shouted over the din, "Unsick bar! They're invisible!" Panic crept into their tone, the certainty of invincibility bleeding away shot by shot. Inside Harrington's tank, the men felt the tide shifting, though exhaustion dragged at every limb. Martelli's humor grew darker, sharper, as if laughter itself were a weapon. "Cap," he said between reloads, "if we live through this, I'm never calling this mule a cooker again. Maybe a magician, or a damn mule with fangs." Harrington allowed himself a flicker of a smile. "Just keep firing, Leo. We'll let history name it later." Private Thompson steadied his breathing, his young face streaked with soot. For the first time since the battle began, he spoke with something like certainty. "We can beat them," he whispered, as if trying to convince himself. Harrington heard it, and the quiet conviction in the boy's voice settled deeper in his chest than any cheer could. The Panthers kept coming, but their momentum was gone. Every yard gained cost them another machine, another plume of black smoke. Harrington's Shermans darted like wolves nipping at the heels of lions too heavy to turn. Courage alone did not win battles, but cunning, timing, and faith in a man beside you could turn steel into clay. Von Kleist cursed as another panther erupted, its ammunition cooking off in a thunderclap that shook the ground. The battlefield mocked him. His polished doctrine, his certainty in German engineering, all crumbled in the smoke of Mortain. Yet still he drove his men forward, desperate to crush the Americans before the humiliation grew beyond repair. By midday, the field was a graveyard of wreckage. Wounded Germans stumbled from burning hulls, some screaming, others silent as they collapsed into the dirt. Shermans, battered and scarred, still prowled the hedgerows. Each survivor carried scars of fire, chipped paint, cracked hatches, but they lived. Against the impossible, they had endured. Martelli leaned against a gun, his voice ragged. "Cap, do you see what's happening? They're breaking. Jerry's cats are breaking." Harrington did see. He saw more than that. He saw belief taking root in his men. What had begun as survival was now transformation. They were no longer victims of arithmetic, no longer 7 mules awaiting slaughter. They had become something fiercer, harder, a force the Germans had not expected. The tide had turned, but Harrington knew tides could shift again just as fast. He looked at the horizon, where smoke curled endlessly, and whispered himself, "We're not done yet, not until the last cat falls." The words carried no humor, no poetry, just truth. Yet they were enough. His men tightened their grips, steadied their hearts, and prepared for what would come. The Panthers were wounded but not finished, and the fields of Mortain still demanded blood. As the sun began its slow crawl westward, shadows lengthened across the wreckage. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, the Shermans held not just ground, but momentum. And with momentum came hope, fragile but fierce. Von Kleist clenched his fists in fury, his pride burning hotter than the wrecks around him. This was not the script he had written, not the destiny he had promised his men. Yet the battlefield cared nothing for pride. In Mortain, cunning had begun to eclipse steel. The mules had kicked, and the predators had stumbled. What came next would decide not just a battle, but a legend. The fog that sheltered them in the morning began to lift by afternoon, revealing a battlefield scarred with fire and ruin. The hedgerows of Mortain, once green with summer's life, now smoldered under the black breath of burning panthers. The Shermans crouched among the wreckage like scarred survivors of a prize fight, dented, battered, their paint blistered by heat, yet still standing. Captain Harrington wiped soot from the edge of the periscope, his eyes scanning the horizon. He knew the Germans would not accept humiliation so easily. What had begun as a clash was becoming a reckoning. A voice cracked over the radio. Ellis, his words ragged with urgency. "Cap, they're regrouping. More Panthers moving from the east, columns forming up." Harrington's stomach turned cold. He counted at least 15 shapes through the haze, their silhouettes hulking against the horizon. Dozens had already been destroyed, yet more kept coming, as though the German arsenal was bottomless. The truth pressed down on him. 7 Shermans had whittled the odds, but mathematics was creeping back with claws bared. Inside the turret, Sergeant Martelli rammed another shell into the breach, his knuckles raw and blistered. 15 more, he muttered, his voice thick with disbelief. Hell, Cap, they don't quit. But beneath the complaint was something steadier, a determination sharpened by the fires of the fight. Martelli had stopped cracking jokes. The weight of what they faced pressed too heavy for laughter. Private Thompson clutched the photograph in his pocket, the edges worn smooth from handling. His face had lost the last vestiges of boyhood. He spoke softly, almost reverently. "If they break us here, it's over for all of them back home. We're the line." Harrington heard him, and though he kept his face impassive, the boy's words dug into him like nails. They weren't fighting for ground anymore. They were fighting for meaning, for proof that the thin-skinned Shermans and the men inside them could stand against the so-called indestructible. The Panthers advanced in disciplined lines, black crosses glaring through the smoke. From his command tank, Von Kleist drove them forward, his pride stung raw by earlier losses. He spat words into his headset, demanding speed, demanding blood. To him, this was no longer strategy, but vengeance. His career, his honor, his iron creed of German supremacy, all of it balanced on breaking the 7 Shermans that had defied him. Harrington tightened his grip on the radio. "All units, listen. They've got the numbers, but they're overconfident. We don't meet them head-on. We bleed them from the flanks. Hold your fire until you see their bellies." His voice carried steel, but his heart hammered with doubt. He had asked his men for more than was humanly possible, and now he was asking again. The ground shook with the thunder of engines. Panthers pushed into the lanes, Iron Titans rolling with methodical menace. Their guns traversed slowly, hunting shadows, as the Shermans slunk deeper into hedgerows, weaving like wolves stalking prey larger than themselves. Ellis fired first. From behind a shattered barn, his Sherman loosed a shell that slammed into the side of a panther. The giant erupted in fire, black smoke belching into the sky. A cheer went up, but it died as Ellis's tank took a direct hit moments later. The explosion threw steel and men into the air, a terrible blossom of fire. Harrington clenched his teeth, grief cutting sharp, but he forced his voice steady. "Keep firing. Don't let them pin you down." The battle descended into chaos. Panthers roared through the hedgerows, their guns hammering, their tracks grinding over corpses and wrecks alike. Shermans darted in and out of cover, every movement a gamble. Martelli's hands bled as he reloaded, the heat inside the turret suffocating, the air thick with cordite and sweat. Each shot fired was a prayer and a curse. Von Kleist's fury only grew. He bellowed orders, his fist pounding the metal rim of his hatch. Every loss was a wound to his pride, every burning panther scar that mocked him. His men obeyed with desperation, their confidence splintering beneath the relentless strikes of the inferior Shermans. Inside Harrington's tank, the world narrowed to seconds. Thompson called out targets with a voice stripped of fear, his boyish tenor hardened to iron. Martelli fed the gun, each shell an offering to survival. Harrington sighted, fired, adjusted, fired again, each decision a razor's edge between life and annihilation. A panther rounded the hedgerow ahead, its gun swinging toward them. Harrington didn't think, he acted. Fire! The shell tore through the German's flank, the blast rocking the Sherman backward. Flames poured from the panther, its turret blown skyward in a shriek of torn metal. Thompson's shout filled the turret, a raw cry of triumph. But triumph was fleeting. Another panther struck from the side, its shell slamming into the Sherman's hull. The tank groaned, metal screaming as fire licked along its side. Harrington barked orders, his men scrambling, the smell of burning fuel clawing their throats. Martelli cursed through the smoke, dragging Thompson away from the flames. By miracle or stubborn luck, the fire sputtered without igniting the ammunition. The tank was wounded, but alive. Harrington wiped soot from his eyes, voice raw. "We're not dead yet. Reload. Aim low. We finish this." His words cut through the choking air like a blade, anchoring his men to something larger than fear. As the sun dipped low, the field became an inferno of burning steel. Panthers lay scattered, their carcasses belching black smoke into the evening sky. The Shermans, reduced and battered, still fought on, each shot carving into the myth of German invincibility. Von Kleist stood in his hatch, his face pale beneath the grime. Around him, his once proud formation was shattered, reduced to wreckage and fleeing survivors. He gritted his teeth until blood filled his mouth, but he could not deny it. The field belonged to the Shermans. The impossible had happened before his eyes. Harrington's crew sat in silence, exhaustion weighing them into their seats. Martelli's hands trembled as he lit a cigarette with bloodied fingers. Thompson stared out at the smoldering horizon, his photograph pressed tight against his chest. Harrington leaned back, his voice barely above a whisper. 7 Shermans against all that. No one answered. Words were too small. Around them, Mortain smoldered with a requiem of iron. A dirge of steel giants fallen, and of 7 stubborn mules that had refused to bow. The battle was not the war, but it was a story carved into the marrow of every man who lived it. And though night fell heavy, the fire of belief burned brighter than the wrecks that lit the fields. The Germans had come with steel. The Americans had met them with cunning, grit, and defiance. And in Mortain, the Shermans had written their legend,